Now that we've had the vet Julian Wilmore out here and we've done all the necessary blood tests and vaccines for the horses to go to Singapore.
It's based on the import requirements for the importing country, so there's a series of blood tests and procedures you've got to observe, and there's a restriction of movement on the property and the confinement with the group of horses away from all the other horses. The work involved with these has been probably a little bit more because they're horses going into competition straight away, a little bit like race horses. And these horses have got to undergo exercise and have that training fitted in with all their other procedures. There's just a bit more management in terms of vaccinations and blood test collections, working in with the riding and the training.
This is part of the process that has to be done. Legally, we have to go through this process. It's very important for the horses that we don't have to change their routine too much, because we want to keep having the training in place and be able to still maintain the horses while they're in quarantine. As you can see, we have now the whole area fenced off, and we also have a list of people here that are actually allowed to enter the premises, and if your name isn't on this list, then you are not allowed to enter. You know, it can be on your shoes, on your hands, your clothing, if you've been to other horse properties, so we're getting quite strict about who can and can't come in. So it's just a simple part of the last procedure for us to get the horses to Singapore looking and feeling fantastic. DHL were the people that handled the logistics of moving all the gear to Singapore. We had some purpose-built aluminium containers made especially to cart all our riding equipment, saddles, bridles, shin boots, hats, gloves, all those sorts of things were put into these containers. We had to cart all our feed. That included a 40-foot container full of lucerne hay and all the barrowstock feed as well that they've been eating over the last 12 months. We took the food over to Singapore so that when the horses arrived, at least their feed was going to be what they are used to. As the sun set, it was time for the horses to get ready to go, and that included taking all their rugs off, making sure their feet were clean, and then they were binded with some tape to minimise any injury on the trip for their travel and minimise a chance of springing shoes. It was really good to have Rojni Selvam, the official vet for the Singapore Youth Olympic Games, come and stay with us for a few days leading up to the horses leaving. She got to know the horses and their routines, which made things much easier for her when it came to travelling the horses to Singapore. There was a convoy of 5 trucks that arrived to pick the horses up. The horses certainly knew something was happening. It was the last time that their hooves have touched soil until they arrived at the Singapore Turf Club. There was no trouble loading the horses on the trucks. The airport's about an hour's drive from Glen Haven Park. When we arrived at the airport, a company called IRT managed the transfer from the trucks onto the pallets to go onto the plane. When the horses were loaded from the trucks onto the pallets, they all had their own feed and water that we supplied from Glen Haven Park. Normally there's 3 horses to a pallet, but for this trip we decided we'd give them half a bay extra, so there were only 2 horses travelling on each pallet. Once the horses were loaded onto the pallets were then weighed. Weights were given to the pilot, and then the pilot told the professional grooms where to place each pallet so that the weight was distributed evenly. This was the largest single movement of horses in Singapore history. The dollies towed the pallets out once they were loaded to the Singapore Airlines cargo plane, and then the horses were delicately loaded into the hold of the jumbo, ready for their 8-hour flight to the Singapore Youth Olympic Games. And don't forget that the Youth Olympic Games start on the 14th of August and go through until the 26th.